If we could come to order. I just got the high sign that it's 1:30. I was watching that clock instead of my atomic clock, so we'll get started. Good afternoon and welcome to this special workshop where we will be reviewing suggested changes to policies for our district. I remind everyone to please silence your electronic devices at this time. Also, if you wish to speak at public forum, please complete a form found on the table at the rear of the room and bring it forward to Ms. Harris. Today, the purpose of our meeting is to review suggested improvements to our policies. I want to remind everyone that this is just a step in the processes after all of the policies had been reviewed. Every policy will come back before the board to be advertised and then to allow time for the public to comment on any changes. So I wanted to be sure that the public understands, those of you that are watching on your streaming device, that there is opportunity for the public to weigh in on all of these. And I'm sure that when we get through to this process, and we're hoping to have the process completed, totally completed by October. And thank you to all the work that's been done. I want to thank the attorney, the superintendent, the staff, because this has been probably sometimes tedious endeavor. Being a policy wonk, I don't consider it quite as tedious as others do, but I know it takes extra time and effort, but we are every year required to review because the legislature always provides opportunities for us to review and see whether we're still in compliance. And so at the end of this, in October, we will have the best set of policies we can until the legislature goes back into session. So I want to welcome Tom Young and Frankie St. James, who have been here since Monday. Of course, those of us who were at FSBA also saw them there, so I don't know whether they got to go home in that interim time or not. But they've been working with our staff and with Ms. Odom to get ready for us to be able to take care of a few more chapters today. And what I've asked Ms. Odom to do is introduce people and kind of lead us through it, because she and the NEOLA staff have been the ones that have spearheaded this, and I think it's best for them to lead us. Are there any questions before we get started or any comments? Okay, thank you.
I would be absolutely remiss if I did not acknowledge my right and left hand, Linnea Day, who has done all of the coordinating and scheduling amongst the many different departments, and she has truly, truly just been a workhorse through this whole process, and I could not have done it without her. The process, you may recall from when we did the bylaws, the staff made recommended changes, the board, because the bylaws generally belong to you, made recommended changes. We came to the workshop, worked through it, asked questions, had discussions, and then came up with whatever the finalized product was. Moving on, we're getting into the realm of things that are vested within the superintendent's authority to make recommendations, so that's why there was no board involvement in those stages. Nevertheless, these are your policies, so it is appropriate for you to weigh in and have input into their development. One of the things that I really appreciate about NEOLA is it is highly customizable. I'll give you a classic example. They have a very good basic policy on student accidents that basically says if a student gets injured, people are expected to render first aid within their training, etc. We have a policy on the availability of student insurance that parents have the opportunity to voluntarily purchase, and also a requirement. We have a blanket policy for students who are involved in athletics. Mr. Wyndham felt it was very important that we keep that. It's in our current policy, and he felt that it was very important that it remain. And so we told NEOLA, this is what we'd like to have in there, and they said, that's great. So it's in there. So if there are things that staff and the superintendent felt were important to remain in our policies, we've incorporated them in there. Beyond that, they do the true value of NEOLA is if there is a statute out there that says a school board shall adopt a policy that has this, and this, you better believe that in there is a policy that says the school board hereby adopts this, this, and this. And if there are any subsequent legislative changes, they will let us know. We generally, staff and myself, try to stay on top of that, but when you see the number of bills that are coming out of the legislature every year affecting education, it's a pretty daunting task to stay on top of all of them, and so they do that for us. So we did go through, there's a lot of language in some of these that may be considered just kind of surplus language, and one of the ones that we kind of got into the habit of getting rid of, and this is just for your benefit, anytime there was language that said the board believes or the board agrees, we got rid of that, because I think it's a disservice to a board member that might not agree with a particular thought. And so we don't want to suggest unanimity, particularly on difficult topics where there may not be any. So we just stuck with just the facts. There were some instances that we did feel it was appropriate, and they were generally in, I'm trying to think of one we just looked at this morning. But there were conversations that we think it is appropriate in this case. So you may still see some of that kind of language appearing. There are a number of policies that NEOLA recommends, but they are absolutely not required. And you'll see in the chart that I made for you guys, if there's something that's not required, I've just put that we didn't select it, it's not required, didn't take it, or it's redundant, or it's been combined with some other policy. So that's kind of the way we worked through it. Do any of you have any questions before I turn it over to Mr. Young?
I have one question, because as I remember, when Mr. Young was here earlier and we talked about if we don't accept the policy as they have suggested, that they will not be able to help us in court. So where we've added additional language, does that
Oh, so the way that will be indicated, I want to say, I know, I couldn't name it off the top of my head because these are all, as you can imagine, are running together in my mind, so I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I do know that there is one that we wanted to go with the way we do business. So if you look at the bottom of that policy, there's going to be a copyright. Most of these policies say copyright, NEOLA, and date. That indicates it's their policy, they warrant it. But if you see at the bottom, copyright Escambia, and date, that means it's ours. You may actually see some that have both, Escambia and NEOLA, and that may be because we inserted one tiny provision that they are not on board with. And we will always have the archive to see exactly what that is. So if it ever comes, if we ever get ourselves in trouble for not following their advice, then absolutely. Anything else? I'll turn it over to Tom Young.
Good afternoon, board members, superintendent, council. It is a pleasure to be in front of you again. As has been mentioned both by the chair and by Ellen, staff has done lots of work on this. That's appropriate because the product that we're working on is the entire policy manual. And it is the policy manual provides you and the public with the legal basis for the actions that you take. So it is appropriate that lots of time is being spent on this. Ellen also mentioned, as I think did the chair, that occasionally the legislature makes some changes in the law. And occasionally some of those changes involve education. For example, we have an update coming out. NEOLA provides semi-annual updates and special updates. Our first update is coming out in a week or so. It deals with the legislative action and will involve revising 70 policies. They have, if you'll pardon the personal feeling about this, they've meddled in your business to the extent of requiring us to change 70 policies. Last year, we had to change 80. This year, we're also issuing 2 special updates, one on the new changes in the OCR regulations, which the Department of Education has weighed in on and said you're not to follow. We'll provide you with the federal law, and you will decide what to do with that based upon your council's opinion and the board's direction. The other will be EDGAR policies, which deal with grants and funding. Special update. 11 policies are involved in that. So we're constantly going to be changing what we have once you finally agree to this monumental project. About the chair's question and Ellen's response about the language, which is the district's language. If it is significant in volume, basically what NEOLA tells you is you warrant your language, NEOLA warrants ours. And at the bottom of that policy will be the dual indication that NEOLA and Escambia have responsibility for this policy. So, having made those preliminary remarks, you have received the superintendent's recommendations regarding sections 1,000, 3,000, and 4,000 of the policy manual. Those 3 sections deal with administration, instructional staff, and support staff as it relates to HR, human resources. So, we'll start with the 1,000 section, and I'll ask the board members, have you any questions concerning the superintendent's recommendations in the 1,000 section? Now, I can tell you this workshop will go very quickly if we proceed in the way you've just.
I wanted, if we can pull up 1020.
1020.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm something there.
Employment of the appointed superintendent.
Right, and it has in there, I think this is the one, yeah, where it says not standing any other law,
Yes.
the $225,000 annually from state funds. So that's in statute presently.
Yes, may not receive more than $225,000.
And so those districts that pay more than that supplement it from other funds?
Yes.
Okay. I just didn't know that we needed to put the actual number in because they could change it, so.
They may, yes.
All right, and then, any other questions? Okay. 1060. It has to do with the interim superintendent, I think.
Capacity of the appointed superintendent.
My question, if I wrote the right policy down. I was doing them, yes. Second paragraph. The second paragraph alludes to may be removed at any time for cause by a 2/3 majority vote of the board. And in the previous sections, it's always majority. So I was wondering about that.
Ellen, do you want to respond to that?
I would say that probably is specified in there, because for us, a 2/3 majority is a majority.
Right.
And I would imagine that they included that in there simply because they do deal with districts that have larger than 5-person boards. So I don't know that
It's 3.3, so it would, to me, seem like you have to have 4.
Oh, well, that's actually, you're not wrong.
Yeah, so that was why it brought.
And that's the sort of thing, if you think that creates an ambiguity, I think we could just say by a
Sure.
majority
Yes.
vote of the board.
Yes.
I'm in agreement on that.
Okay, Mr. Adams?
And when I was trying to go back and forth between the draft and on the computer. Seems like on the superintendent, we thinned it down, but we're relying more on the contract. Okay, and I remember we had that discussion in the past, okay? So
On
if
that-
anybody sees that in public, they know the contract's gonna kind of run that train.
On that point, where there is a difference between the school board policies and the negotiated collective bargaining agreement, the collective bargaining agreement will prevail unless the school board's position is lawful and the CBA, collective bargaining agreement's provision, is not.
Mr. Adams, could you kind of clarify what you were talking about? Because I'm not sure I was following.
Well, when I was trying to go from the draft to the other one, trying to see what actually was removed,
Okay,
it looked like it was more lighter the way we have it. It's not as much verbiage because you're more relying on the contract.
are you talking about under the appointed superintendent?
appointed
Okay.
superintendent. Under the appointed
So I
superintendent.
did another
So
policy.
don't- You know, over there it says a majority can, you know, all the different things.
Yeah.
And the contract that you're referring to is the contract with the superintendent.
That one he's
Right.
Not
on.
the collective bargaining
No,
agreement.
I'm-
Okay, I misspoke, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I was kind of confused.
I heard him say that, but I,
Because I know that we removed, what I understood, what I saw when was, we had put all that in to remind ourselves of the process.
Right.
And it was, again, a procedural thing rather than a policy, because if it stays there, then every board will have to do exactly what that thing said, so, and you know, even
Change it
Andrea
there.
said that
authority of
we,
the board in the future can change what we're doing right here.
that's exactly right.
If they change the procedure, which it's not in there, then you don't have to come back before
right.
the board. But if you put all the procedures in the policy, anytime you want to change that, you'd have to go back through this same process, advertise it for a month, have the first and second reading, and so forth. So it is a good idea not to put procedures in the policies.
Mrs. Hightower, if I might, not just with that situation, but with a lot of other policies. NEOLA gives you a lot of options that you can select. And so, for instance, there might be something that says, in negotiating a contract with the superintendent, you will consider this, 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 and this. And if there are brackets in front of it, that means it's optional. Our general default setting was, unless there's a reason to be that specific, to take it out.
Right.
Because we don't want to say, you will consider these three things every single time. A future board might decide, we don't want to consider that particular thing, we don't think it's important. So, additionally, there are a number of places that say, the superintendent shall develop administrative procedures that will consider this, 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 and this. While the verbiage that says the superintendent shall develop administrative procedures doesn't have a bracket to indicate that it is optional, everything underneath it does. So in many instances, we struck that simply because there's another part of the overall overarching policy that says the superintendent is responsible for developing administrative procedures. So that's in there. So we don't need to reiterate in every single policy that the superintendent will develop administrative procedures to implement this. And again, on most of those, another reason for us doing that was to get away from these very specific enumerations of what he will consider and what he will include in these policies, so that, you know, if the board, when these policies are being developed and discussed, if you feel it is important, or if whoever the board is at the time in the future feels it is important, they can have that conversation with the superintendent and make sure that that has been considered when developing those procedures.
In addition, if I might, Madam Chair, in addition to what Ellen said, there are some policies that do not require procedures. So there will not be a set of procedures for every policy. Only those policies, the language which Ellen is referring to is the superintendent will develop administrative procedures as appropriate. So it's his call as to whether or not procedures are required to implement that policy.
And one of the things that I think is very important to think about is that the more procedure you put in my policy, the more opportunities I have to get into the wrong lane
Yes, that is true.
and into the weeds.
Procedures are typically the responsibility of the superintendent, yes. And by the way, we provide an entire set of procedures to match up to the policies that require procedures, and let you guys make them district-specific. But we give you a place to start as far as the procedures are concerned.
But that would go to the superintendent for him to share with his staff. It wouldn't come to us necessarily, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And those will also be housed on the board docs platform.
Oh, so we can read them.
Yep, so when you go to, they're not available yet, because we have to get through the full adoption first to see what it is that we're going with. But if you looked at another county, such as Seminole, which they do use the administrative procedures, when you go to board docs and you click on the book that says policy, and you click on policy manual, they have a separate menu that says administrative procedures. So if you want to see what their administrative procedures are, you would click on that. And so once we reach that stage, then that's where you'd be able to find it.
And for ease of finding it, each procedure is numbered exactly the same as the board policy. The board policy is PO 1060. The procedure is AP 1060.
I have nothing else wait, yes I do. Yes I do. In 1122, it comes up several times within the policies where, and I think it's because statutorily we have to designate a person, but my question is, because we put a specific person in and they have a specific position, every time that person is no longer in that position, do we have to come back and change the policy?
Yes, you have to go back and change the policy, but it is a technical change and need not come back and be advertised and voted on by the board. It would typically come back to the board in the policies or the agenda items that are not.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It's kind of.
Consent agenda, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you very
yeah.
much, Counselor. It would typically come on, and then if any one of you found a particular one of those which seemed not to be inconsequential and technical, you could pull it and discuss it.
It's my understanding that we're required, ADA,
Yeah.
EEO, to have the individual
Yes.
that you must contact. I remember Ellen early on saying, Keith, we gotta make sure we get Malia's name on the marquee there by the elevators, and we quickly got it there, so.
Now, OCR is coming up with new rules and regulations, and one of those rules is to remove the requirement that the individual be named. But we're not there yet. We're still under the old rules, and so we have to have the names in there.
I just needed to ask that question. Thank you. So anybody else have anything in the 1000, the administration part? Mr. Svetsko.
Yes, ma'am, but it's way down. Questions that I had previously, I had spoken with the attorney and went through and got clarification. PO 1216.
Oh, yeah.
Dress and grooming.
Yes. I have that covered in the 4s and the 3s.
Well, it started here. So
It does start there, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
With that, at one point, and this goes back a number of years, when we went as a district through the Studer training, a committee developed those standards for dress and grooming. And they were, what do I say, they were recognized, they were adopted. But I don't know that anything really has come of it, or that things are in there at this point. And I brought it up because I thought maybe we do need to have some discussion as a board whether we believe standards for dress and grooming in administrative, instructional, and support are appropriate, and if so, where do we go from here in order for that to occur? I'm going to say that I personally feel that it is something we would want to have, and because we had gone through that process in the past, I'm sure that that information is available somewhere and can be looked at again and reiterated as to whether we feel that's needed or not. I know that we've said, I've said, and through my career, that If you are a professional, you dress professionally. And I must say that I've gone to a lot of sites where the administrator would be hard to pick out from anybody else on the campus. And I don't know that that is something that we as a group, and again, it would be a majority, we as a group feel is appropriate, or we want to address, or we want to have those standards enforced. I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Superintendent?
Mr. Fetzko, you're correct, and we used to have the standards of behavior. They were right there. We had many, many, many employees. In fact, over a majority of the employees had signed off on it, try to live by those standards, both at work and at home and in the community. Remember, these 1,000, 3,000, and 4,000 are administrative and professional staff with support too, I believe.
Yes.
Instructional.
I believe in another
Yeah.
life, Mr. Young dealt in collective bargaining and negotiations. A long time ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Matt Schmidt. It said if you can ever avoid having to negotiate a dress code, you should do so. I remember that conversation very, very well. But you can always do exactly what you're talking about, and what I believe this policy stipulates is setting standards, expectations, and when you start getting a group of people that abide by those standards and the expectations, you will begin to see the others follow. That's why I remember I was all for this. I think this is something that we need to do. I know the people that it impacts, and it would certainly trickle down to the other employee groups. I'm just going by what Max Schmidt told me in 2004.
When Max Smith was there, people dressed better.
That's correct. And he helped write Chapter 447, at least I believe he did.
Well, one thing, because I have it all, I just forgot this one, because I went back and I added 22 and 32 and 42, 16, because it's all the same thing. And that's what was going through my mind is does it have to be bargained? But on the other hand, if we have a dress code for our students, is there some way we could put in policy that the teachers have to follow the student dress code at least? I see Ms. Kostag's ready to throw something at me, so.
Well, we have actually, I mean, I've been in teaching in this district for 36, not teaching, I taught for 15 years, and even 35 years ago, if you were breaking the student's dress code, you were handled by the administrator. I mean, that was something, that's not a nice way to put it, but you could use the discipline matrix if they were breaking the dress code of the students. We have had discussions at the table over the years about dress code in the contract, and we have always agreed to not put that in there. But we all have the agreement that we need to be professionally groomed, and I've always had support by every president we've ever worked with that you should at least be able to adhere to the student dress code. So I don't think it's an issue for us right now, but this is, a belief, so I think it's a good thing to do.
My other concern is, I would almost rather, it kind of, as I read it, is it leaving it open to the administrator at each building to determine what the dress code is?
This policy is for our administrators. That's the way I read it.
That's correct.
Visiting a lot of schools, I can tell you that the dress code is different at different sites. Absolutely. And in fact, it's different at different sites in different grade levels.
And I understand the idea that if I'm an ESC pre-K teacher, wearing coats and ties or high heels and dresses may be very inappropriate for what you're going to have to do on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that, but I am saying that I have observed people whose dress was not professional. And I think that That is something that we should strive for. And going back, that we did have those standards adopted and adhered to or believed in when we went through it. And it was the administrators and the instructional staff who came together and did that. There was a lot of work in those groups that did it under the Studer guidance at the time, and it was accepted. I just think that maybe it's the time to say, all right, let's look at this again, because I think that just as we've all seen, if you put a kid in Sunday clothes, they behave different on Sunday when those clothes than when they're in their play clothes on Saturday. And that reflection and that kind of difference is there. And I think this was a good opportunity for us to have this discussion, to bring it to light. And I know that this is a workshop. I don't have a coat and tie on, but for the board meetings, I will. So when we're doing business, that's one thing, but there are appropriateness to it. Now, should I have come in a tank top and board shorts? No, even in the workshop. But so there needs to be some recognition by all of our employees from the board down that there is an appropriate way to dress for whatever we're going to do.
Mr. Adams?
I agree with Paul there, but let me ask this again. We do not have a dress code for any of our employees? Is that what I heard?
That is what you heard.
But we got a dress code for the students.
Yep.
And I know where we get into PE coaches, they're going to be out on the field and stuff like that, but it seems like, but I guess in a way, the policy allows us to talk to Keith if there's a problem that we see, and the superintendent would take care of it through his channels.
Yeah. I would manage it.
You would manage it.
Not handle.
Manage it.
Tag used the word handled, and she actually gave me a book one time written by
Yeah.
John Wooten, and he said, you manage people.
Manage
I
it.
appreciate her giving me that book.
Handle dogs.
Yeah. Point taken. But yeah, I see your point, Paul. Yeah.
To that point, on that point, unless, did you have another question or comment on that point?
Was Ms. Crosshair going to say something?
Where is it? Point. I have it. I have our standard. It says, I maintain a professional image by dressing appropriately according to my work assignment. So that's our standard.
And where is that found?
That is on the website, and it is what you were talking about, the standards of behavior that we created with employees years ago. And we still want them to live by all of those things.
Do you communicate that with the principals at the building so that they can
Well,
communicate that with their staff?
Text Ms. Payne that I will add that to our training in the HR section. So,
I'll tell you a great example of appropriate dress, and it's only happened over maybe the last 5 or 6 years, Sean. You see our maintenance employees, uniforms. I mean, it's right, it's in uniform, Timmy. Good. I don't know how long ago we started it, but close. We didn't have that for a long time.
We actually started in the garage and then moved into certain shops in the maintenance and then into the warehouse. So now all of our itinerant maintenance and ops staff are in uniforms, but we began that about 4 years ago.
To that point, Madam Chair, on the dress code, 2 comments. One, for administrators, you may develop whatever code you like, or you may have no code, and you may be arbitrary and capricious with administrators. The law does not protect them. They serve at the will of the superintendent and the board. For dress code, professional, good idea, and by the way, I have a coat and tie in my suitcase, but it's 90 degrees out there, 94, I think, and this is called a guayabera. This is what professionals wear in Cuba. doctors, lawyers wear this. So I think this is professional. Some people might not. Looks like a shirt. Well, anyway, second point. Superintendent, board, your administrators are at your mercy. Dress code. You can have a strict dress code or not. Teachers, support staff, people covered by the collective bargaining agreement. You do not have a dress code, as I understand it, in those contracts now. But you have an understanding, as I understand it. I will tell you that if you change that understanding without negotiating it with the unions, you will get an unfair labor practice. And they will prevail, because dress code is a term and condition of employment, and the law says that you must negotiate concerning terms and conditions of employment. As long as you have this understanding and things don't change with the understanding, you're fine. You're fine. Questions or comments on my comments?
So, Mr. Fetzko?
No, I'm good. We have raised awareness, and I think that it's something as we move forward, that, portraits of achievement and excellence and the things that we strive for, it would be in our best interest for the public to recognize us as professionals. And that's enough said.
So you don't think we need to change the language for the administrators?
No, I don't.
But that's good language.
I think the language was fine.
Okay.
It triggered questions that we have standards. We know what we could rely on if we needed to have, if somebody needed management in that regard.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So that what we're setting up, we can still provide corrective action if we see something, and they can be disciplined, or I guess, I don't know if that's a good word to use, or not disciplined for their
You're
dress.
talking about teachers or support staff. If you're using the same criteria or qualifications that you've used in the past, and the discipline is consistent with what you've done in the past, no problem.
Okay.
I get it? Okay. Anything else, Mr. Fetzko? Anything else in the, okay,
There was one I had before you got to, I think you went to 12, because it's a little bit different than our current practice. I just want to make sure you were aware. 1150, as it relates to resignations, it would be upon our receipt versus our providing you, the board, the resignation, which really is the way you're supposed to do it.
Effective, the resignation would be effective when the superintendent receives it. And the reason for that, if it's not obvious, is sometimes board meetings are a week or 2 weeks or more after the resignation has been submitted, and sometimes you want to act on that as soon as possible.
So you would get a date at the board meeting,
like we do now.
yeah, but it will be,
No, I mean, but we get resignations that happen before
Yes,
our
ma'am.
board meeting
Yes, ma'am.
now.
okay.
Um,
It was not like that in our policy, and it will be now.
okay, so,
It was a situation where we were not compliant with your policy.
and as I recall that policy, it also says that the resignation letter can be submitted to, like, a principal, and then they send it on to you, correct? Okay. Is that the way it has always been, or has it always had to go through HR before?
It will eventually land in HR, but we've got them, on the front porch of the 215 West Garden Street.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, I'm taking you through history. Email, mail, and unfortunately, sometimes we don't get anything. They just simply don't show up.
One thing I wanted to remind the board, when we did the bylaws, there was a whole section on definitions. And under the definition of superintendent, it says anybody he may designate. So when you see things that say the superintendent, that doesn't mean that somebody has to walk up to Mr. Leonard and hand him their resignation. It needs to be directed to his office, but basically as soon as his office has received it, it's.
Good point.
Other than that, the superintendent would have a great deal more to do than he does now. But the policies presume that there will be some delegation by the superintendent. Other questions on 1,000? If not, we can move to 3,000, and as we move to 3,000 and 4,000, I suspect the board members have been advised, and if they haven't, they may have noticed that many of the policies in the 3,000 and 4,000 series are virtually identical to those in the 1,000 series. Those, for example, harassment, discrimination, that sort of thing. Other policies in the 3,000s and 4,000s are different because the 3,000 and 4,000 series involve collective bargaining agreements and language which may apply to teachers and custodians and food service workers that is different from the terms and conditions of employment that administrators have. So that's why there are some differences.
I want to take us back one step because I wanted to make sure that we understood that, like 1217 on weapons. I think this is one of the ones you were talking about where we inserted our language because we had that conversation before.
Yes, but in the draft that NEOLA, in the template that NEOLA originally provides, they have a section that specifically notifies boards, you have the option to create this exemption. If you choose, check this box. And you may recall that when we did adopt that, we made it very narrowly tailored. And so I inserted the exact language that we had from our current policy, making the secure encasement exception to firearms in a vehicle applicable only to students. So it's there, and NEOLA was fine with it.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
And this is from that situation we had at Tate, where we made sure the people that had concealed weapons, adults with license, didn't have any problems with it happening in the car?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the weapons policy appears in the 1,000 series, the 3,000 series for instruction staff, 4,000 series for support staff, 5,000 series for students, and 7,000 series for the public. Same basic policy, just changing the words based upon to whom it applies. On the 3,000s, questions?
3,000s. Well, I got that one covered.
Instructional staff.
Well, I'll start since nobody else has it. In 3120.07, I couldn't understand what casual employment of instructional staff meant.
It's in all of them, casual employment.
But
Did they wear casual clothes?
yeah, I was like, I didn't understand that term. Ms. Odom
3127.
explained it to me, and I have an understanding of it. So,
I think, I believe at least, I scratched my head about that one as well. And where I kind of landed on it is I think it is authorizing possible almost consulting services. So if you have a particular staff member, employee who is an absolute wizard in something in particular, and you want them to give a presentation or do something that is outside of their job responsibilities, because the policy specifically speaks to outside of their ordinary job responsibilities and hours, then the school district is authorized to hire them for those purposes. Now, that may be a complete misreading, but that's the way I process it in my mind.
3127,
No, 3120.7.
20.7.
0.07.
0.07.
Yep. 21.
There you go. Right there.
3120.07.
3120.07, casual employment of
employment.
instructional staff. Yeah, thank you, Paul, because I had that down. I hadn't.
So this is almost as other duties assigned?
No, because this is,
No, this is outside of, that, you raise an interesting question, because if we do have job descriptions that say other duties as assigned, then,
yeah.
and I will say, I don't know that this, if the board is not comfortable with this, I don't see that this is one that we are required to.
No, you are not.
Accept.
Many districts delete this policy because they don't have, quote, casual employment, unquote.
And that was one of the conversations that we had with staff was, do we really do this? And we just weren't quite sure what to do with it, so.
What this does is if you don't do it now, it is discretionary and says if you decide to do it, you have authorization, policy authorization to do so. If you don't do it now, you don't have to have this policy. If you decide to do it, then you create a policy.
With
I
our
just brought it
instructions.
up because I didn't understand what it meant.
Mr. Adams?
Well,
No, I go to our collective bargaining agreement, and we have part-time work, and then we have required work. If you require, you're gonna get your regular rate of pay. Imagine Mr. Williams, Mr. Fetzko, Mr. Slayton, you've required teachers to do work beyond the bell, and you paid them to do so. That's the way I see it is. I don't think we need it.
If
Well, I
that's your
agree.
recommendation, then there's nothing that requires us to keep it.
Correct.
I think it opens up a confusion.
Sure, it clearly has.
I agree. I agree.
I think everybody's shaking their heads here.
So we'll delete that one.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And it can be deleted from all those chapters where it shows up.
Correct. Other questions on the 3000 series?
It's not really a question. Okay, so, 3129, this is kind of coming up because of our conversation we just had, the 3129.01 that deals with tutoring.
31.
So that would that have been casual employment? But that's, anyway.
When I read it, I didn't see it that way.
I didn't
because
either, but I just,
Casual employment would infer that the school district was paying the teacher to tutor that student. I thought this was where the student's parents were paying the teacher additional to tutor the student.
okay. Because, I mean, there's those new laws that now give us grant money to pay teachers to tutor outside the school day, correct?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, what number were you referring to? 0.01, 3129.01, okay. That's not casual employment.
No, okay. Okay.
Further questions on that one?
This is more of a, Mr. Slayton has a question?
Well, I'm trying to read through it because in my past employment, this one has reared its ugly head several times.
There is a place in here, I think, that we do need to have conversation on the conflict of interest. I'm looking to see if it's in 3129 about if you are in a particular position.
Yeah.
For pay, can you do this, that, or the other? And I
I-
just know what's happened in the past, and I think y'all had to rewrite the last board policy to make certain things were understood.
And what I remember from my understanding was that I cannot take a student and recommend that they need to get private lessons and hand them a card and say, and I teach private lessons.
If that's your student, that's covered by this policy. If that's not your student, I believe you can hand them a note and say you need some tutoring and maybe recommend someone, as long as it's not your brother, your sister, or your wife.
Right. I'm just making sure that what it says is still covering that, because that's where the confusion comes in.
Further questions?
Okay, so just to confuse myself even more, the last statement, for purposes of this policy, remedial tutoring does not include New World's reading scholarship account services permitted under policy 3129.
Reason for that is because you are in remedial tutoring, you are not contracting with the individual teacher, you're contracting with the services who assign a teacher to that. So there is no conflict there, and that would not be, that would be consistent with this policy.
I see Mr. Slayton.
Well,
You're digesting?
what I'm trying to figure out, give me an example. I don't understand that particular
Anybody
Not
Mr. Wilson, can you give Mr.
World's Reading
Slayton an
Scholarship
example?
account.
What I can tell you, and Mr. Young and Frankie may know it better than I actually believe that come July 1, the New World's Reading Initiative will be in law.
I think that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a program, not just recommended, it's gonna be provided by the state, and there'll not just be books, there'll be tutoring that occurs. And I don't think we would be able to say, well, Ms. Hightower is a third grade teacher, she's part of the New World's Reading Initiative, and she's also tutoring, and that's where that funding's coming from, and then she's just gonna tutor her own students.
And she could do that under this policy, because the contract is with New World and not with
And
the
that,
teacher.
and I think you're gonna begin to see more programs like this, not just getting grants, but being put into statute.
Sad but true.
Okay.
I do love deregulation.
So you're telling us we're getting another gift?
Yes, oh yes.
The New World's, never mind. Yes, sir.
Yes, right. Just
I mean, it
say,
gives kids,
I mean, I'm
more
not,
books, free
no.
tutoring.
This
Right.
process has been in existence.
Yeah.
We've had teachers who work as tutors after hours for other state programs.
Yes,
And if they're assigned their own students, they're assigned their own students, but they're not our teachers at that time. They're
Correct.
the program's teachers.
that's correct.
This has been going on for a while, back with AYP and all the other, and
Yeah,
And that was when we had to change the policy the first time, because there was something in policy that said you cannot tutor any student that had been in your classroom.
but then they had a hard time finding people who weren't currently employed as teachers. So the teachers who worked during the day were able to be hired in the evenings and do it legally. But this has been going on a long time.
yes, sir.
I guess my confusion is the fact that there is a program that is mentioned, not as generic as what you're talking about.
Well, they could have named other programs, but this one, as the superintendent and Mr. Young said, this one's going to become part of law. The others were part of initiatives.
But they were just like, they're the same type. So
Yeah.
is it necessary to name this program?
I think it's going to become very prevalent. And so I think it is a good idea to have it in there, simply because if there's a teacher who says, hey, I've been asked by the New World's Reading Program to provide tutoring services to my students, if they look at this, it makes it very clear to them that it's fine, it's not a conflict.
So, but if a group comes along with the Old World Reading Scholarship account, do we have to put that one in?
Yeah, I think, I see your point. It's like, it's
Yeah,
like we're
why is
saying this particular program gets special.
Right, that's,
Yeah.
you know, and the confusion is, somebody's gonna say, wait a minute, mine's just as good as this one. So, thanks.
This one was developed by the legislature.
Thank you, DOE and legislature, I understand,
Regulation.
thank you, ma'am.
And again, for all of us, policy, while it's not easy to change, it is fluid in some respects.
right.
That,
These are not written in
when
stone.
when other people suggest that we need to change things, we will respond. This is not really a question so much as I just thought it was an opportunity, kind of like Mr. Fetzko did. 3232, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had one on 31.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
On 3140.
On
where it's-
3131.
Okay, we'll go in order.
Oh, go ahead.
He's going to go first. He's just jumping in.
3131, reduction in staff. My question had been, is there a conflict with our bargaining on that? And Ms. Crosstag, if you and
I
the
just
super-
mouthed to Kelly,
That's,
She needed to look at that one.
It's straight out of the
My concern is
statute.
that's a procedure, and it's basically an act from the collective bargaining agreement.
Right out of the statute.
Yep.
And
Okay. Again, that was just a question. And 3132 vacancies, with that one, I wondered if we had a conflict because of certain times of the year that we don't let teachers transfer.
by the way, if I might go back just for a second to 3129.
Tutoring?
No, the reduction in staff, 3131.
Okay.
This is a perfect example. I'm not sure what your collective bargaining says, but when this law was first passed, many collective bargaining agreements, especially those involving support staff, had seniority as a criteria for termination. That is contrary to this law. So this is an example where if your contract had that language in it, this law would prevail over your contract language because that contract language is now contrary to law.
Caroline, did you get that?
Vacancies.
Right. When vacancies, and it talks about student teachers transferring, there are points in the calendar that we don't let teachers transfer.
After July the 12th.
But the last sentence is the superintendent shall establish procedures to facilitate. So,
It's not true that they can't transfer. They can only transfer to certain types of positions.
That in conflict with law? No. Okay, so everyone said no, I'm good. If the attorneys say
Well-
no, I'm good.
yes,
Yeah.
we blame her.
but it may be something that if, I do recall that with our old policy, we had very specific language about who gets to apply first and who gets to do what. That, to me, is more of an operational standard that was set by the superintendent, but I think in olden days, it probably was necessary to have those kinds of things written down. But if
You could delete that last paragraph, and I will say to you that this is probably covered by your collective bargaining agreement, the filling of vacancies, and the collective bargaining agreement would prevail.
Talking about 3132.
3132.
So what are you suggesting that could say? Or
I'm suggesting that
Nothing?
you could delete the last paragraph because we had that paragraph, that section in the 1000 series which says the superintendent is authorized to develop administrative procedures as appropriate.
I actually wouldn't want to delete it. That if indeed we are going to do some things with not permitting people to transfer at certain times, I'd like it to say that the superintendent can establish a procedure for that reason. And there were times that we said that certain people weren't going to transfer. And if that's what we do, then I want it to be written somewhere that there is that ability as given to the superintendent to develop those procedures.
As long as it's understood that those procedures should not conflict with the collective bargaining agreement, and if they do, the collective bargaining agreement will prevail. Superintendent and I go back 20 years or so, and when he was in HR and I was speaking to the Florida Education Negotiators, so we've had this kind of discussion back and forth for many years.
We have.
I'm going to introduce a little lawyerly ambiguity for you, which I think works, that may help you feel more comfortable with this. The master contract does have very robust and complete language about voluntary transfer, which I think is what you are talking about. And the second sentence does say that all members of the instructional staff shall be eligible for any district vacancy, providing they are properly qualified. And so I think that if there's language in the master contract that says, if you're needed at this school, you can't apply elsewhere, then they're not qualified. They're not somebody who is eligible, who is free to go.
Okay. As long as you defend us, I'm good.
Okay,
Does
so
that work for the HR people?
can I ask one question?
Oh, let me see, they're talking, I just wondered if they thought that this
They're leaving.
covers whatever we needed to cover.
Most sections we did add, you know,
Subject
when
to
not in, subject to it agreeing with the collective bargaining agreement. And then what we need to change, we'll go to the table with the next time, if that's what the law says. So that is what we did on most of them. I honestly am flying blind right now because I can't get in, and I'm working from memory, which has been a while back that we did these, so trying.
Mr. Slayton?
Well, my question, Superintendent,
Yes, sir.
is do these procedures exist at this time?
Yes, both of them, vacancies and reduction in staff. They're in
So
both
there's
collective
there
bargaining
is to
agreements.
facilitate identification and evaluation of candidates for administrative, supervisory, and other leadership positions. Okay,
Yes, sir.
and I'm all right with it.
So,
Mr. Young, would you be comfortable if we just,
added,
another ambiguity from somebody who's not an attorney, if we just someone put it somewhere in there, put, is written in our master contract? Or do we not need to do that?
What we have done in other bargaining unit members should refer to the collective bargaining agreement.
yeah, I was wondering if that would make it a little,
We inserted that in a number of policies.
Right.
okay. Since we do know that there's some things that govern that. Is that okay with you, Mr. Superintendent?
Oh, absolutely.
About HR? You're in now, okay.
And that one could still have the footnote NEOLA if we did that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. And it would read, and I'll defer to Ellen to correct me if she likes something better and wordsmith it, but collective bargaining unit members shall or should, well, collective bargaining unit members refer to the collective bargaining agreement regarding vacancies. Collective bargaining unit members.
Right.
Collective bargaining unit members.
Can I ask us procedural, are they all considered to be members?
Yes, they are in the bargaining unit.
Unit.
Yes, it
Okay.
doesn't say anything about members. It says bargaining unit members.
Okay.
Is that all right with you, Ellen? Okay.
And if it doesn't say exactly what you have in the other spots, you can just make it uniform. That'd be okay with us, right? That if whatever you've added to others, if it's not exactly the language, y'all can go back and fix it. Okay, anything else on vacancies? Because I was going to move to Mr. Williams.
Just for the sake of putting it there, 3216, staff dress and grooming.
I got it.
Enough.
Okay. On 3140, the suspension or dismissal of instructional staff, there's a statement in there that says any instructional personnel with an annual contract may be suspended or dismissed, and then it goes on. Does this not apply? I don't know what's the percentage of continuing contracts we still have in Escambia County. Does it just apply to annual, or a continuing contract person as well can be suspended or dismissed using this?
3140, are you? Is that right?
3140.
Yeah, 3140 says annual, any instructional personnel with an annual contract may be suspended. Are we at 100% annual contract in the county now?
No, unless in this policy, this probationary contract, Are you including those as annual contract?
I'll defer to Ellen on that. I have an answer, but I don't want to.
Okay. And then we have, I don't think we have anybody left on continuing contract.
You do, they are
We have
very
about
old.
48% on professional services.
Okay. But I thought when I left from Sky, I might have signed a couple that will continue, that still might be there.
So is the question you're asking is, does it cover all of our employees?
Does it cover all the employees on just annual
Yeah.
contract employees?
If you go down to almost the bottom, there is something that says any member of the instructional staff who is under continuing contract may be suspended or dismissed at any time during the school year pursuant to the provisions set forth in state law.
So it's almost like a contradiction. Well, I mean, if you say, why do you say annual
I
and
think that
just not use that one statement and take out the annual part?
Well, I think that it's making the difference between the continuing contract and the
correct.
annual
Annual
contract.
contract.
Letting, that both have the same,
Consequence.
yeah.
So that's why I was,
I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what the procedure is for termination of a continuing contract employee, but I suspect it is different from that which is required for an annual contract employee.
Very true.
And regarding probationary, there's a provision that says non-renewal of employees during their probationary period or upon expiration of an annual contract shall not be considered dismissal and shall not be subject to this policy. So that's probationary employees is handled elsewhere.
So in that paragraph, should it be say annual contract and continuing contract? And that first one, it says any instructional personnel with an annual contract or continuing contract?
I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're talking about the suspension, right? That anybody, be they annual or professional services, can be suspended. We know the termination of a professional services is different, but suspension, we do adhere to. Is that
Yeah,
the
but it
part?
says suspension or dismissal.
yeah,
Right, now dismissal is different for annual than professional services. We have to go through a different process.
I guess I'm just hung up on, it's just saying
well,
annual contract in that first sentence, and
yeah.
we have more than just annual contract employees.
And down where Ms. Odom was talking about, it says suspension or dismissal. So it's, if they're different, can they be in the same sentence?
This is
continuing
pulled
in the
direct,
annual.
I'm looking at statute, this is mirroring statute.
This
That's
That
why
doesn't mean it's
worded.
right.
Right,
Right.
yes. And it doesn't mean it makes sense.
Right. I mean, I think,
But this is a perfect place for us to say, NEOLA doesn't make this stuff up. And when we come upon stuff like this, which is certainly capable of different interpretations and could be misunderstood, we do not try to divine what the intent of the legislature was. We put the words in there and we warrant those words as being consistent with the law, and we hope you guys can deal with it.
The way I interpret, and this may help you, David. All right, so I may be a first-year teacher, and what I'm really going to be on is probation. I'm going to be on probation for the entire year, but it is really an annual contract.
Right.
But I can be released at any time with or without cause. That second year, when you recommend me for reappointment, I'm going to be on annual contract again, but there is no probationary period. So I'm either going to have to violate one of those 7
Correct.
deadly sins,
Correct.
or you're going to have to wait till the end of the year and then non-renew me.
That's correct.
And I can be suspended, which, in my opinion, one of the things really good about this policy versus what we've had in the past, with or without pay by the superintendent or the board. It used to be that we'd have to wait. It may be somebody messed up the day after the last board meeting. Well, we had to pay them for an entire month to suspend them without pay at the next board meeting. This gives the superintendent you're giving the superintendent the authority to take the action to go to suspension without pay when needed. And then notice the board at the appropriate time.
Next question.
David.
You have anything else on that, Mr.?
Mr. Williams, when all else fails, we fall back on the fact that we got what they wrote.
Okay. Okay.
I did want to add with the question about the probationary employee, there's a whole other section on contracts with instructional personnel that spells out that probationary employees can be released within the first 97 days.
And I don't really have any questions on 2232, 3232, 4232. It's on political activities, other than to say people need to be well aware of the policy concerning political activities as we move into this political arena, and especially those of us that are, we have the half-cent sales tax thing on, and we're not allowed to do much about that, and but there are other things too. So I had a conversation with the superintendent yesterday about, reminding all of us, not just us sitting here, but our employees about possible
Coming up
problems.
on that season, so our plan is to do an email to all of our employees that stipulates what we currently have in board policy, requesting that they certainly adhere to that policy.
And I had a conversation with Ms. Odom because y'all are probably really smart people. When people call you with a complaint about somebody, I asked her, I said, who should I refer them to? And I think I'm going to start referring them to the supervisor of elections.
You say that again? What was?
Well, I've gotten some complaints about issues that really we can't do anything about, and
That's not part of our employees, something else. But I think if it was one of our employees, we get a complaint.
well,
The superintendent would have to be
I've shared
notified.
with Ms. Odom some of the things that were allegations for them to investigate.
Happens every election season.
Yeah.
Well, and the one thing that I think is, I need to throw this in there. Neither our employees nor you as board members sacrifice your First Amendment rights to state your positions. We're not supposed to do it in our official capacities. I'm so grateful for the language in my contract that says I keep my mouth shut about politics. But if teachers, employees are free to advocate for whatever they would like, whatever candidate they want, whatever issue they want on their own time, and we have no authority whatsoever.
And on their
correct
own
them.
email,
Absolutely.
not the district email.
Correct.
Additional questions on 3,000?
Anything down there, gentlemen?
Moving on.
Okay.
4,000 series, non-instructional support staff. And I will say to you that this is a slightly complicated section because probably 95% of the employees that are covered by this section are covered by the collective bargaining agreement. About perhaps 5% are what are referred to by the Public Employees Relations Commission and the law as, quote, confidential employees. Now that phrase has been often misinterpreted. Every principal feels that his or her secretary is confidential. I submit to you that that is not the interpretation that is given to confidential employees by the law. The law says that a confidential employee is an employee who works in support of or with or is involved directly in the collective bargaining process. So in other words, if the principal were at the bargaining table, then his or her secretary would be confidential as long as he or she sits at the bargaining table, because what happens is there's an exchange of information, the secretary is involved in that, and that should be confidential for purposes of collective bargaining. The confidentiality is only related to connection with collective bargaining. So for those, there is no contractual provision, and 4,000 series would apply. The other employees should always look to the collective bargaining agreement to make sure that this language is consistent with the collective bargaining agreement.
And there are a number of places where we have said for those particular employees, they are entitled to the same benefits as those who are actually in the collective bargaining unit.
Are we ready to move to the 4,000s? Okay, Mr. Fetzko, do you have anything in the 4,000s other than the one that we're...
A question that just came to me is, where does professional staff fit?
It depends on their position. Are they administrators? Administrators are defined in the law. If they're not administrators, then they are in the 4,000 series.
Okay. Thank you.
I noticed on Ms. Odom's sheet that we have an option in 4430.04. Does that mean that we're supposed to discuss that?
Let me
It's on the very last page of these.
It may be one that we discussed this morning.
But it says no concern, but option needs to be addressed.
Which one is it now?
4430.04.
04.
They decided to just do away with it.
Okay, here we are.
I, as you know, I wrote that late last night. And we did meet with some staff this morning, so that may have been resolved. Let me check. 44.
Because I read it after I looked at this when you sent it out to us, and didn't know that we still had something we had to talk about. Because it wasn't indicated on any of the other 3430, 2430, those 1030, whatever.
Finding it.
Because it looks like you check, normally personal leave without pay requests will not be for more than 1 school year. But it may be
Oh,
extended.
yes, that was the one that we dealt with this morning. There was a box that was left unchecked.
Okay,
And so it has been taken care of.
okay.
What is on there now should be accurate. And in fact, it was a change that we discovered needed to be made with regard to all 3
Okay.
sections, and that has been done. And it simply had to do with the ability to request extended personal leave.
And they may request it. It does not mean that it will be granted.
Okay, and I was thinking that in reference to all of, and I'm sorry, I can't imagine how much this is just jumbling in your head, because just reading it over the last few days. Because this one says, where did I just see it? About accepted by the, granted at the discretion of the board for the following.
Which number is this?
This is the same one we're on. And I was just wondering why I know it comes to the board as part of the agenda, but is this something that can be authorized prior to it, for the superintendent with?
But I changed this
Was
morning.
that not what that's what
we
you
did
requested,
this
right?
morning, yes.
Okay.
That it has, the initial authorization is where the site administrator, the principal, and then it comes to you through our agenda.
All right. So
Because the
the assumption is because then it's coming to us that the superintendent is okay with it?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And they're always able to say no to a second year of a personal leave.
For the principal to do
Yes.
that, or
Yeah, our site,
Yeah.
yes.
or the site administrator, because they might need that position filled in order to do the business. Okay. So really, it comes from the principal, the site administrator, to us. Okay.
through HR and the superintendent.
Okay. And this has to happen before they can start their personal leave?
Start their second year, yes.
Yes, we send that out in the spring and we give them a deadline to tell us. And then we get it approved or not approved and we move forward. That's Courtney's shop.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other concerns?
I did notice in the, when Mr. Fetzko put me on the staff and dress grooming, I did notice that the instructional does have a disclaimer that says something to the effect of subject to collective bargaining, and that does not appear in the support staff version.
Sure.
And I think it's appropriate for it to be in there.
Yes.
I'm sure every time you read it, you see something new.
It's one of the reasons why we say that these are not written in stone.
And we'll still have another time to review them, so.
We will. And if subsequent to this meeting, you have some more questions about the 1,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 series,
Yeah.
bring them up to Ellen, and we'll talk them over and resolve them.
I just think it's been one of those things where, as Mr. Superintendent just alluded to, we've been doing it a certain way, but it wasn't reflected in policy that way. I think that we all get into that position where you've done something a certain way and you were told to do it that way, and somewhere back in the way it was put down differently from the legislature. So.
And every district that we've worked with, and we now have 35 clients, school districts in Florida, every one of those districts has had some portion of their current policies in violation or in conflict with the law. And we've pointed that out to them, and they've fixed it. Now, I don't remember that we've had any gross violations or misinterpretations or misapplications of the law, but this is not surprising because, as we just talked about, we're going to have 70, we're going to give your staff 70 policies which need to be changed, and we show them exactly the language that needs to be inserted to bring the current policies into compliance with the law. Every year that comes up. And you have staff who have other priorities than to look through every legislative act to try to find some piece which applies to school districts. That's all we do.
And the other piece of that is, you alluded to earlier, intent. Somebody else is now helping us figure out what the intent was.
Yeah.
So.
And we're glad to do it for you.
Well, we appreciate that, because I know that it's been in board policy that we review our policies every year. There was a time where we only did certain ones every year, and
now you can say that your policies are reviewed every year.
Yep.
And the legislature, quite frankly, keeps us in business.
And a lot of lawyers too.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers.
Yeah, a lot of lawyers too. Excuse me, is there anything else, Ms. Odom?
Just, Mr. Leonard has set October as an adoption date, so I kind of want to let you know and let staff know there's going to be a huge lift that needs to happen. We are now roughly halfway, a little under halfway through everything that needs to be done. They, you might imagine, are very busy people in demand across the state, and getting them on our calendar is difficult, not because of their calendars, but because of their calendars trying to mesh with our calendars. And so what we have discussed is the possibility of what we've been doing, as you mentioned, for the last 2.5 days. Staff has been meeting with NEOLA. We've been working through this. We need to do that again. Linnea and I are going to try to do as much of the upfront editing as we can, but we absolutely positively have got to have the materials, the recommendations, and the changes brought to us so we can do that in advance, meet with any of the staff members that have questions, work through all of these things, and then for the behind the doors meeting with NEOLA to make sure they're okay with what's being proposed, we have discussed in early August doing that virtually. So they don't, it's easier for them to facilitate if they can do it virtually. It gives us a little bit more flexibility as to when we schedule with them. Absolutely 100% recognizing that that is the start of school. That's why it is vitally important that we have people now getting this information to us so we can get it all done, so that when you've got other things, other fish to fry in early August, this is something that you don't even have to worry about. So we have got to have, if we are going to adopt it in all of this in October, it has to be advertised in August unless the board is willing to hold special meetings and I do think a special workshop is absolutely going to be in order, because it will be a massive undertaking to go through everything and finalize it. Although I will say with these workshops, a lot of that heavy lifting has been done, but this will be the last chance to put eyes on it, to discuss it, make sure that everything is good and where you want it, and then it's going to be advertised and prepared for the final hearing.
Ellen, I think that you, we had talked about the advertising having to occur in September, not August.
No.
So you have a chance to, no?
No,
But we have 28 days.
Based on our current meeting calendar, it would have to be August.
Okay, I
Because
see.
there are not 28
right.
days between
Okay.
the September and October meetings.
Got you.
So we have 4 chapters left to do?
Oh, 6,
6.
5,
5.
Because we've got 2,
no, 6. 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
because you have more than we have now. That's what I was trying to
But
figure out.
these HR was the biggest chunk.
Yeah.
And we would typically do them 3 and 3, have 2 more workshops. And those workshops, I will be present again. And we'll do like the 2s and 5s and probably 7s or 8s or 9. And then finance there's not much flexibility in the 6,000 series, so that ought to go pretty quickly. So it's doable in 2 more workshops.
So we need to try to figure out dates for
Yeah.
2 more workshops.
Yeah.
So.
Or I will tell you this, if they go the way this one goes, and I have no reason to believe that they won't, we may only need 1 more workshop. That would fit into your schedule much better. Fitting 2 more workshops in would probably almost certainly require a special workshop, and you and I want to avoid that. So it'll probably be 1 more workshop if we're all put together in the first part of August.
So, Mr. Superintendent, what is your thought about how quickly, 5 chapters left?
6.
6.
Might
But
be.
Oh, I forgot
think
2.
I think the 6s are largely finished.
Yes, they are.
The 2s are almost finished.
Okay.
Um,
So we've got property and operations and students.
And the 7,000, 8,000s, and 9,000s go pretty quickly. They're not nearly as complex or extensive as the ones in the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. The 2s and 5s are a big chunk. That's the student section and the curriculum and instruction section.
Ellen, am I being too optimistic or pushing too hard? Should we push it back to say just advertise in October? Or okay, good, all right.
Advertising.
Well, I know that many of us have travel plans in the summer, so if we could figure out what dates sooner rather than later, I personally would appreciate it. Yeah, we're discussing calendar, so, come with I know you weren't gonna be here, Mr. Fetzko, but you can, you're calling in? Okay.
So you had said at the beginning of August, are we talking the very first week of August or what?
The school starts the 12th.
We are Frankie and I will be available virtually
Okay.
the first week in August.
Okay, so now,
Whole week.
as far as workshop though, you in person, when would you be
I am
available?
available the entire week of entire month of August and the first 2 weeks of September.
I don't think they're available in July.
The 1st of August, we already have a tentative schedule for a tax thing at 5. I was just thinking, you know, August 1st, yeah.
And then teachers return August 2nd.
You're not here on August 1st? Okay.
My only concern with August 1st is that would not have given us the opportunity to meet virtually with them.
Okay. I was just
Right.
trying to help. What? How busy, I mean, that's when teachers are coming back. Of course, by the way, why are we making our teachers come back on a Friday?
I
I'm
thought
just
the
gonna
same
say.
thing. In fact, they'll tell you I asked that. We may have limited staff that would be present for our meeting, but that's okay, because they would have worked with Ellen
That's
and
correct.
Linnea.
It will have been done by then
Yep.
by staff.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
And I will say that now, you know, hopefully, we'll be able to get the edits done a little bit more quickly, and we can get them to you, and hopefully you've gotten a little bit more comfortable with moving through, the different chapters and finding where the things are. And Linnea and I have discussed just kind of leaving things in one place so you don't have to jump back and forth, to find things. And as always, if you want something printed out, just let us know. And if you prefer to have the hard copy, we can absolutely get that for you. But I'm just throwing this out there. You know I'm in my office. I am always available. If any of you want to come and spend an entire day with me, I am happy to have coffee or whatever, and we can just work through it. If you want to, if you have any questions about it, I'm happy to help facilitate those kinds of questions and you know, helping you address any concerns that you might have.
Well,
And the
I
same with
found-
staff. You
yeah.
know where to find me.
I found it easier for me to work on the where the red lines were and where the check marks were, because it helped me figure out what was there and to begin with and what was being taken out, and that way if I had a question, you know, I could ask. So if y'all could make that particular piece probably available for us to, without having to, I have now memorized everything. I think I've got it all ready to go, but so y'all can kind of look at your calendars, and we'll look at that week, that first full week in August. Mr. Superintendent, if you'd kind of look at your staff's calendar, and yeah, because there'll be a lot of in-service type things happening.
But again, as far as the staff is concerned, their work will have been, if we follow this calendar, their work will have been done by the end of July.
Well, this room is used a lot for in-service. The thing would be, my thought would be, it would have to be more of an evening meeting.
I know that, well, I don't know that, I mean, that could be a late evening. I know that Mr. Tompkins has an in-service on the 8th. Ms. Payne, do you know if that's here?
Guinea's going to
Oh,
check the calendar. But I am a board member that is willing that if we can't get it ready by the August meeting, if we back up 28 days and come up with another date for a special meeting to consider the policy revisions, I think that would be an acceptable solution. I don't want to put a lot of stress on our staff with school opening. And so if we can come up with so that we're enough days that would still allow us to do things in the appropriate manner to get it done in October. Any other board members, anybody have a problem with doing it that way, having a special meeting if we needed to? Okay.
I will be out of town 21st of September, all the way to, I guess it's the 6th or 7th of the next month.
Ooh, is that your fun? He's casual.
I'll put my tie on the third one.
Okay, we've had a lot of fun. So, and I'm glad most of the people did not hear some of the comments that were coming from this end of the table. So is there anything that y'all want to share with us before? Thank you so much for your work and for coming all this way, because I know you're on the road a lot.
We are. But I will say to you, Madam Chair, that it is a pleasure for us to work with this board, the superintendent, and Ellen and the staff. I can't always say that, but I can say that here. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you staying overnight or are you headed home? Okay.
My flight.
You got a long way to go.
My flight from here to Tampa, this morning it was scheduled at 8:30 tonight. And then I received a notice that it's going to be 9:30 tonight. And then I received another notice that it's going to be 10:30 tonight. That's 10:30 your time, 11:30 my time. I get to Tampa at 1 o'clock and I have to drive 2 hours to get home. So I may stay here tonight too.
Sounds like a good plan.
I could probably guess which airline that is.
I need to give you one bit of information,
Okay.
and really it's for you as well as it is our staff that's here. We've had a little incident there back at Vernon McDaniel. I don't know that the water will get
Oh, yeah.
hooked back up before the end. You think it'll get hooked back up before the end of the day? So we're letting the employees that work there clock out and go home. So we'd like for all of you to clock out and go home as well. Hopefully by tomorrow morning, we're up and running and have functioning water. So if not,
An elevator.
And an
go up for
elevator.
the board meeting. The elevator was working when I left it. We just still had the sign up, so made people nervous. But
Well, you know, anytime somebody says the elevator's out, I give it a couple of days to get back into service. Mr. Fetzko?
I actually rode that elevator hoping I would get stuck. And I was told by the guys working out front that that was a new water feature that would end up being a pool. A pool. Oh, hot tub, whatever.
Anything else for the good of order? I don't see any forms for public forum, so I am closing public forum, and I wish all of you a wonderful afternoon. We are adjourned.